I get this opportunity to welcome to the Radiation Conclave on Prostate Cancer. It's our fourth meeting. We have planned to organize meeting in on prostate cancer zone-wise. So to get in contact with more number of radiation oncologists all over country, we have divided country in 4 zones. This East zone consists of Northeast region, Bihar, West Bengal, and Odisha. We have already conducted 3 meetings each for rest of the zones. This meeting is hosted by Vivekanand Health Mission Trust and supported by AstraZeneca. I am Dr. Manish Pandey here, and I am very much excited to welcome you all in this conclave. Before starting the scientific session, I want to share the information provided by AstraZeneca regarding a program, Pro Action. It is a campaign which Think Beyond Pill, where AstraZeneca building content to address prostate cancer patient need during entire prostate cancer patient journey. Be it emotional need, be it exercise required for pelvic muscles, be it sexual life queries, be it empowering patient about treatment, be it do's and don't do's while taking Zoladex and many more. AstraZeneca team will reach out of all radiation oncologists to share pro action campaign. They will meet all of us and they will formulating the program. And within 1 month, they are going to launch this program in our country with help of radiation oncologists all over the country. This meeting is just to sensitize all radiation oncologists about this patient beneficiary program for prostate cancer patients. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining meeting. And now I invite Dr. Dinesh, who is additional professor at IGMS Patna, which is a state cancer institute, to conduct the scientific meeting. Dr. Dinesh, please.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Dr. Manish, for all these invitation, and it's a big task for me to moderate all this session. And so we are very privileged to have legends of radiation oncology with us. So first I will invite Dr. Vikas Jagtap. He is program director and associate professor and head at Northeastern Regional Institute of Health and Medical Sciences at Shillong. So Dr. Vikas, please.
Thank you, sir. And welcome to all of you for joining today for the Radon Conclave for the East Zone. And thanks to Dr. Manish for making all the efforts to make this happen. So today we will be discussing on the prostate cancer, the newer development. So there are multiple topics depending on whether the adjuvant therapy or neoadjuvant hormonal therapy in prostate cancer. Then afterwards there will be a debate on focal ablative oligometastatic prostate cancer, which is a new thing because most of the prostate cancer now, oligometastatic disease, are being treated as a radical intent. And afterwards, we'll have a panel discussion on when and how to treat pelvic lymph nodes. So we are lined up with the burning issues as of today for the prostate cancer. And I welcome all the faculties, chairpersons, and the panelists for today's sessions. And I request Dr. Dinesh sir to please continue the session and start the further proceedings.
Thank you, Vikas. So to begin the session, we have, as I said, 3 legends of radiation oncology to for the inaugural speech. And with us, Dr. B.K. Mohanty sir, and he is Director, KIMS Cancer Center, Kalinga Institute of Medical Sciences, Bhubaneswar. Dr. S.N. Senapati sir is Professor and Head Radiation Oncology at HPGIC, Cuttack. And Dr. J.K. Singh sir from our own state. I'm very pleased to welcome him. He's Padma Shri Director, SS Hospital and Research Center, and ex-Director, Mahavir Cancer Center, Chairman of Cancer Care India and Breast Cancer Foundation. So to begin the inaugural speech, I welcome Dr. B.K. Mohanty sir for the first inaugural speech. Please, sir. Dr. B.K. Mohanty sir, please. You are welcome.
So I'm B.K. Mohanty. I'm now relocated since June to Bhubaneswar from Delhi. Since I'm new to the East Zone, may I request that Dr. Senapati and Dr. J.K. Singh may say a few words and then I can sum up.
So, sir, Dr. Senapati, sir, please add.
Thank you, sir.
Sir has requested, so please.
Thank you, sir. Friends, it's a very good initiative because in this oncology practice in Eastern Zone, I'm having experience of 30 years. And also my boss, Dr. Mohanty there, because he's also a guide, always guide us for the any problems that we face or come across. Dr. J.K. Singh and Dr. Tomcha Singh is sir also, he's there. They're all senior colleagues and they have taken a lot of effort to bring this academic standard of this, particularly the Eastern Zone. And definitely we are also in par with that of the other centers. But specifically today's topic, that is the carcinoma prostate. This is a burning topic and also this is a topic of interest for not only the we oncologist community, it is also of much more interest for our postgraduates. Because this topic is also, I have gone through the content of this topic, a lot of new things have been also placed for the discussion. And definitely I appreciate the effort of Dr. Manish and Dr. Jagtap also, because they have, like our ICRO program, that the senior ICRO program, we take the ICRO at the different parts of the country in 4 zones. Like that, the Manish has taken this initiative, and this is a very good initiative. And definitely this will bring the standard of the radiation oncology community up to international level. So I appreciate the endeavor of the Manish and Dr. Jagtap and everybody for this new thought, and hope that this topic will be of interest to all of us. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, sir. So I will now request Dr. J.K. Singh, sir, to say a few words.
Very good evening to all of you. It's a great pleasure to be a part of this prestigious webinar, and I really congratulate Manish to bring this good topic to all of us for discussions. Friends, prostate cancer is one cancer. The incidence has drastically gone very high in the last decade. Even in my personal experience, also, the prostate cancer was not very common in the past in our country. But now things have just reversed. The best part of this cancer is that it's a very slow growing cancer involving the person in very advanced age. And one good part is that there's a good marker, that is a PSA marker, which not only help in diagnosis, but in asymptomatic patient also helps in monitoring the prognostic part. The best part also is that there are many treatment options in the early stage, in the advanced stage, and right from the surgery, different types of surgery, radiotherapy, focal therapy, symptomatic therapy, hormone therapy, and targeted therapy, etc. That makes us to have a choice very easy. And that's why the survival is very, very long. But in spite of the various advancement, there are still some issues. I think it needs to be addressed. And I'm sure our learned speaker will address these issues in their deliberations. So once again, I congratulate Dr. Manish and all the participants in this webinar. And which I think this webinar will certainly enlighten us about not only the prostate cancer, but in future, many, many cancers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I will request Dr. B.K. Mohanty, sir, to say their part, and I just privilege
Dr. Dinesh, good evening. Can you please mute all others because there is some background noise coming from somewhere. You can, as a host, mute all. And to all my colleagues, dear colleagues in the East Zone, I feel honored to have been invited to be part of this program today evening. I worked for long years out of the East Zone, so many of you in the East Zone may not be knowing me. And from a very selfish interest, I can deviate a little from this topic, and I'll request all of you to pay attention to the 2 points that I'm requesting all of you. In the East Zone, the cancer incidence, cancer registry, cancer projection still remain much to be desired compared to the rest of the country because of the lower cancer registry program in this part of the country, East Zone. My request will be that all the radiation oncology centers in the East Zone, to list all the radiation oncology centers along with their key person with their email and contact. If 2 who are out of these 59 who have joined here can take the responsibility and map all the radiation oncology centers in the East Zone in coming 1 to 2 months time with one key person, his or her contact and email. That will be a great idea for all of us. Number 2 for me will be that for the East Zone, if a few public hospitals and the private centers can come together and then East Zone specific, geographic specific 2 or 3 cancers, they can work on developing small research concepts to work on it. Maybe these might be short-term research concepts. For example, let's say that all the patients who are receiving surgery and post-operative radiotherapy for head and neck squamous cell carcinoma, we just make a registry and whatever you are doing, we register those prospectively for 1 year. So the geographic specific cancers 2 or 3 to choose for which a research concept can be designed. And maybe Dr. Manish can take the lead from the north and 2 or 3 for mapping the radiotherapy centers and 2 or 3 from this group who can decide which are the 2 or 3 tumors on which small short-term collaborative research can be initiated. Thank you very much. And in case you want to discuss or question on these points, anything that I can facilitate, I will definitely come forward to facilitate. Thank you.
Dr. Dinesh, unmute kar lo.
Yes, sorry. Thank you very much, Mohanty sir, for your very relevant words. So we should surely move forward in this context of registry and all what you have said. So I will again thank all the legends of radiation oncology for their inaugural speech. And so we should move ahead with the first session. And for this, I would like to invite our chairpersons, our respected chairperson, Dr. Tomcha Singh and Dr. Rajiv Ranjan Prasad, sir. So, sir, please unmute, sir. So, Dr. Tomcha Singh is...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Senior consultant in radiation oncology at CIJA hospitals, and Dr. Rajiv Ranjan Prasad sir is Professor Radiation Oncology and Chief of State Cancer Institute at our own center at IGMS, State Cancer Institute, IGMS Patna. So I will request Dr. Tomchand Singh sir to please invite the speaker and introduce the topic. And
okay, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, presently, my affiliation has been changed. I am presently working as senior consultant in American Oncology Institute in Imphal, which has come up recently. So without wasting much time, we'll tackle the first case. The topic will be adjuvant and neoadjuvant uses of ADT in CA prostate, to be presented by Dr. Kaushik Chatterjee. He is Assistant Professor, Department Oncology, PG, Kolkata. Dr. Kaushik, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. I'll just try and share my slides. So I hope the slides are visible.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for that kind words, sir. A small change in my affiliation as well. I have become an associate professor with your grace in the year 2018. So I'm currently working in Calcutta PG Hospital or SSKM Hospital as an associate professor since 2018. And I'm seeing my private patients in Bellevue, Ruby and Narayana hospitals. So I'm extremely sorry for being a bit underprepared. I actually came to know about this event very late. In fact, I got the presentation from AstraZeneca today itself. And but having said that, once I checked out the list of stalwarts like Dr. B.K. Mohanty, Dr. J.K. Singh, Dr. Senapati to be adoring our sessions, and my chairpersons, Dr. Tomchand Singh and Dr. Prasad. With their blessings, we have learned into the subject, and this is a subject which keeps on getting discussed since 2011, because in our student days, we understood that prostate cancers were not into too much of a discussion. But having said that, let's forget why discussions came up since 2010-11 because of new drugs like abiraterone that popped up, but that is purely in the setting of metastatic prostate cancer. Today, we are going to deal with the adjuvant and neoadjuvant usage of androgen deprivation therapy along with radiation and prostate cancer. Now this is a global preview of the existing disease that we will face and discuss throughout this period of next 1.5 hours. But we have to understand a few certain basic points, like it's the second most common cancer in men worldwide. There is huge heterogeneity as far as geographic distribution is concerned, a difference as high as 16-fold seen in, say, South Central Asia versus North America. The incidences are now increasing in the age group of 15 to 39 at the rate of 2% per annum. But having said that, we still have an average age of diagnosis of more than 65. And despite whatever be the prevalence, the outcomes of prostate cancer are the best. As already said by Dr. J.K. Singh, it's a very slow-going cancer. And having said that, 99% of the prostate cancers have a 5-year survival. As compared to all cancers taken together, they already have a survival of roughly around 70%. So with that, improvement in education and diagnosis are definitely needed in low prostate cancer incident countries. And the quality of life and overall survival is becoming important because more and more younger patients are coming into the purview of this disease. So androgen deprivation therapy to be talking of, this is one of the first things that had come upon in the kitty of treatment of cancer. If you can understand, dates back to Charles Higgins in 1944, if I'm not mistaken. And his work that prostate cancer is testosterone dependent got recognition as a novel long after this discovery. And why not? You have to understand that as late as previously as 1944, after the discovery of testosterone being important, the first generic analog came over not less than in the year 1985. That was the first year where GnRH analogs came upon, followed up by flutamide discovered in 1989. So it was a long period of lull for this scientific discovery to be actually being incorporated in the practice. So in this slide, which you see is what is the array or what is the importance of androgen deprivation therapy in the kitty or prostate cancer treatment. If you look at the right-hand side from where it has actually originated, it is everywhere the pillar of treatment in metastatic setting. But having said that, it is slowly percolated down to the lower part. And it is now only the low-risk prostate cancer patients for whom we are not thinking in terms of androgen deprivation, but from the stage of unfavorable intermediate risk to the high risk, very high risk, castrate-sensitive group, metastatic castrate-sensitive, castrate-resistant, then all throughout, the androgen deprivation therapy never leaves our treatment prescription. Now, having said that, why in the non-metastatic setting, the first of its kind, I think the trial was RTOG 7506, which needs a mention because it was started in the year I was born, 1976. And in 1976, that started the first trial of its kind that basically put forward that even in the non-metastatic setting, androgen deprivation therapy has a role in the treatment of prostate cancer. That was way back, RTOG 7506. And since then, we have come to understand the combination of radiotherapy and androgen deprivation therapy is not just 1 + 1, 2. It is 1 + 1 at either 4 or 3. It means there is definitely synergistic action. And with lots of preclinical studies, we basically came up to find out that while radiotherapy is being given, there are basically upregulation of the DNA repair mutations group of the androgen receptors. That leads to an increased chance of failure for the patients who had received radiotherapy alone. Herein, if you add on androgen deprivation therapy, it takes care of that part of AR DNA repair damage mechanism, which leads to a line for failure. So androgen deprivation therapy, along with radiation, is a synergistic action. And having said that, it has now percolated where radiation is there in the localized treatment of localized prostate cancer for a very long time. And it is now this combination that is almost sailing its boat in every domain of localized prostate cancer. So moving on from this slide, let's look at the individual role of the individual conditions. Now, it was very difficult for us to find out individual trials which were talking in the neoadjuvant setting, individual trials that were talking in the concurrent setting, as well as the adjuvant setting. We understand there are so many unanswered things, like which is the best? Do you use it upfront in the neoadjuvant? Do you continue in the concurrent setting? Do you use adjuvant? If yes, which is the best? Now we have many data saying, shifting our focus from the previously thought neoadjuvant to be the best to now the adjuvant setting. So slowly I tried to percolate down 2 or 3 studies which gave us the idea in each and every setting where androgen deprivation therapy cannot be forgotten. Now, if you look at the role of neoadjuvant ADT along with RT, this is RTOG 8610, that famous Macros publication in JCO way back in 2008 that changed the scenario of even the life of Macros itself. This RTOG 8610, goserelin as a neoadjuvant therapy in locally advanced prostate cancer, basically incorporated locally advanced prostate cancer patients T2 to T4 M0 with or without nodal involvement, and they divided in 2 arms, one in radiotherapy alone. Other than that, the other arm had goserelin, a combination of goserelin and flutamide. Having said that, the total duration of treatment was 112 days, and on your right-hand side, you find the primary endpoints were local regional control, the secondary endpoints being OS and PFS. Primary analysis was basically done after almost nearly 7 months of follow-up. 7 years of follow-up. And we also have an updated data of the study, which was done almost at 12 years and 13 years respectively for the 2 arms. The next one in this kitty would be the TROG 9601 study by Denham, and it was once again goserelin as neoadjuvant therapy in locally advanced prostate cancer. This study had 3 arms. One was there was no androgen deprivation therapy. The other was for 6 months, and the in-between arm was for 3 months. Now, having said that, this also had a concurrent component. Mind it, the 6 months therapy had 5 months of neoadjuvant and 1 month along with radiotherapy. The 3-month arm also had 2 months of neoadjuvant along with 1 month of concurrent therapy with the outset of radiotherapy. Now the primary endpoints, once again, time to local failure, prostate cancer specific deaths, the secondary endpoints as delineated. The primary analysis was done at a median follow-up of roughly 6 years. And we also have a 10.6 years follow-up data of this study as well. So it was 8610 and TROG 9601, the Macrosh and Denham studies, and look at their outcomes. Neoadjuvant gosuradenib plus flutamide and radiotherapy significantly improved the disease-specific mortality versus RT alone at more than 10 years follow-up. Data-wise, at 10 years, 23.3% versus 35.6% have died out of prostate cancers in the RT plus gosuradenib arm versus RT alone. On your right-hand side, you have data for the 0 months, 3 months, and 6 months of the TROG 9601 study. And out of them, you will find a hazard ratio of 0.49 for the 6 months neoadjuvant therapy arm. Therefore, there is a 51% reduction in the risk of prostate cancer specific mortality over a period of 10 years in the 6 months of RT plus neoadjuvant therapy arm. Now, survival results with neoadjuvant gosuradenib plus flutamide versus RT with a more than follow-up. You can see at 10 years, the estimated OS difference was 40.6 as compared to 33. So at least 9 to 10% improvement in survival. And if you look at all-cause mortality, it was significantly improved in patients who received at least 6 months of neoadjuvant therapy with gosuradenib plus flutamide. Now, let's look at androgen deprivation therapy as an adjuvant to radiotherapy in high-risk localized and locally advanced prostate cancer. Now, having said that, high risk is a much better term, and if you can differentiate the difference between the prostate capsule being ruptured and one of the seminal vesicles being involved, that differentiates the T2 from a T3. And before I move on to the other slides, you have to remember this. This should have been put up much before I started my talk. This is the simple d'Amico thing. High risk is a better term than local advanced, and what we mean by high risk, it is either a PSA more than 20 with a Gleason score more than equal to 8 and a T3 disease. Simple as that. Without complicating further, if you look at the differences of outcomes of different type of therapies that you could use in the high risk setting, you have these 4 dimensions of treatment, one being radical prostatectomy. Mind it, we are dealing with high risk prostate cancers. The other being external beam radiotherapy, the other arm being implant and neoadjuvant hormonal therapy, and the last arm being implant alone. Now, if you combine all of this and if you look at prostate-specific antigen survival percentage, you will find that external beam radiotherapy was the best one to choose if you had been a choice between radical prostatectomy or in a neoadjuvant hormone therapy and an implant or an implant alone. So I already discussed this slide. So this is overall a show of the incidences that we face the high-risk prostate cancers. From this slide, you can understand the different data groups could show that roughly 14 to 26% of your patients will actually fall under the high-risk category. And let's look at the external beam radiotherapy treatment for high risk. It is really a very selective group of patients who are going to undergo radical prostatectomy. And mind it, we radiation oncologists are far more fair enough to talk about all the modalities of treatment in an early stage prostate cancer. But unfortunately, our urology colleagues failed to talk about our overpowering capacity of using radiotherapy in the setting of locally advanced. And we find some of them using neoadjuvant therapy followed by radical prostatectomy, which I'll show that it doesn't do good at all. So external beam radiotherapy is the sacrosanct mode of curative treatment in the high-risk prostate cancer groups. And by saying external beam radiotherapy, we no more mean a 2-field or a 4-field box technique. We almost no more mean a 3D conformal radiotherapy as well, because 3D conformal radiotherapy is the basic minimum that we can do as far as radiation of prostate cancer is concerned. And we are certainly now, it has moved on to the PORT, that is prostate only radiotherapy. And you understand, without the facilities of IGRT being available, we will definitely not be able to do that. But having said that, IMRT is good enough, but the bare minimum or basic minimum is 3D conformal radiotherapy. But today, our talk is not on the ways of radiotherapy. Wished we had a talk like this, and we could keep on hearing Dr. Mohanty or say Dr. Senapati giving their talks on this topic. But moving on to the androgen deprivation therapy as a cornerstone or a colleague to the use of external beam radiotherapy, let's look at the adjuvant hormone therapy studies. Now we have an array of studies, but out of this, I would really harp upon the 8531. It had a continuous use of adjuvant therapy, endless, indefinite period. It definitely showed an improvement, especially in the Gleason score 8 to 10 group. We have Bola et al.'s trial, the URTC 22863. They had a 3 years use of adjuvant ADT. And of course, DMECO had a short course as well, but they had shown improvement in survival as well. So adjuvant, yes or no? The answer is definitely yes, but timeline for adjuvant therapy, answer is still to come. I'll come to those slides in my later ones. Let's look at this seminal study 8531. It is a phase 3 study having roughly around 1,000 patients. They had divided patients with radiotherapy, believe it, they could not move more than 70 gray, and they either gave androgen deprivation therapy indefinite period, or they waited for a relapse to happen after radiotherapy and then added androgen deprivation therapy. So there was 2 groups. So hormone therapy given indifferently, adjuvantly, improves overall survival in patients treated with 3D RT as compared to RT alone, was the outcome of this study 8531. Now, let's look at meta-analysis. If you look at meta-analysis, you will find that most of the relevant studies, starting from Bola to Roche, everything had been delineated. It included the long-term ones, it included the short-term ones, and overall, we roughly have a patient pool of 3 to 4,000. And if you look at every possible outcome, being biochemical failure, the CPFS, the castrate-specific mortalities, the secondary outcomes of overall survival, each and everything or each and every compartment or domain basically favors the use of androgen deprivation therapy along with radiotherapy. Moving on, this is the overall survival data of the same meta-analysis showing that androgen deprivation therapy with your radiotherapy is a must. Everything favors the use of this combination. Now, let's talk about the duration. Having said about duration, this is a very, very difficult topic to sum up. There are roughly around 40 studies that looked upon the duration, and this outcomes of these 40 odd studies can be divided into 4 groups. One, as minimum, it could be 3 months of androgen deprivation versus 0. It is better. 6 months, 36 months versus 0. 36 months is better. We have a studies of 28 months versus 4 months. 28 months is better. And we also have a study of 36 months versus 6 months. And we found that 36 months is better. But it basically does not answer our question. What is the actual duration? Now, probably to move on to answer this question, there were studies, and out of which this study by Navid et al., they showed that the difference between 36 months and 18 months, you can see the curves are basically like snakes on each other. There is hardly any difference, and there was no overall survival difference between 18 months versus 36 months. So we could bring down this 3 years value to 1.5 years value. And having said that, I should have put in the newer RADAR study. And RADAR study had shown that the 6 months of neoadjuvant hormonal therapy along with radiotherapy is suboptimal as compared to 18 months. So RADAR is a newer study that had said that 6 months would be suboptimal if you are using it along with radiotherapy. RADAR also gave us one more very important information. I'm sorry, I don't have RADAR in one of my slides. That interesting information is RADAR found out that if you're using it for a short term, the amount of time you are using it, the conversion of testosterone to its normal level, which happens roughly in 75 to 80%, it's going to take double the time. It means if you're using androgen deprivation for 6 months, for the patient to get back to his androgens, which will happen in 75% cases, as per the RADAR study, it is going to take 12 months. For somebody who's using it for 18 months, will basically recover androgens, and androgens are very much required for at least a person who wants to get back his functions. So RADAR has given 2 very important destinations. 6 months is suboptimal as compared to 18 months, and that the time for testosterone to come back is exactly double. So you better use the shortest version, but it is finally your call because we're still not into a final domain of what is the actual duration. Now, these are the treatment modalities which you could use: watchful waiting, radical prostatectomy, radiotherapy alone, hormones alone, or in combination. Out of this, we definitely have data. Wherever possible, the combination is the way to go. And radiotherapy plus hormone seems better than radiotherapy alone. Neoadjuvant therapy plus radical prostatectomy has no proven benefit. And I'll come to that. And is radiotherapy really necessary? Once again, it becomes like a silly question, but I have it in my slides. And SPCG7 said that yes, radiotherapy is, androgen deprivation is definitely required with radiotherapy. And on your 2 slides, you can find out the disease-specific mortality and even the overall survivals. You will find they're definitely favoring the use of androgen deprivation therapy along with radiotherapy. This is one more study, the MRCPR07 study, roughly had 1205 patients. And simple, the cancer-specific mortality as well as overall survival. Look at the hazard ratios. everything is favoring the use of androgen deprivation therapy. Now, this is the NCCN guidelines showing what we and how we go ahead in deciding treatment for high-risk prostate cancer patients, at least for the group with more than 5 years of expected survival and who are symptomatic. And I have delineated that, yes, androgen deprivation therapy is very much required. And if you look at this, the third option where radical prostatectomy had, along with pelvic lymph nodal dissection has been done, that is a group that we need to discuss, and I'm going to come in my next 1 or 2 slides. So this is the SWOG Ditters, the chemical androgen deprivation alone survival outcome. You can find its 8 years estimate of overall survival is roughly around 88%. Now, this is the same studies that that had the chemical androgen deprivation along the SWOG. That arm too supports the use of combined treatment versus radiotherapy.
Dr. Kaushik, I apologize. I may request chairpersons to sum up because we are running out of time. Please.
Okay, fine. I'll just sum up. So my next few slides had whether to use in the adjuvant setting. The answer is definitely yes, and it was. We have to remember, if it is node positive, we have to use it. And if there are high risk features like R1 resection, that is when the margins are positive, that's a setting where you cannot avoid the use of combination of adjuvant radiotherapy along with hormonal therapy. So this is supported by the GETAC AFU 16 study. So with that, I'll just sum up on though neoadjuvant hormonal therapy plus radical prostatectomy has no role. So with that, it's just a sum up slide. LHRH agonist versus agonist, that question cannot be answered right now. We only have 2 situations in cases of emergency and in cases of background cardiotoxicities, we can use antagonists where they definitely do not produce the flare. Which drug to use? We have the best data with buserelin, and the duration of therapy is still not decided. A lot of debate is yet to happen on this front. So with that, I really thank my chairpersons, and I'm sorry I shooted the time. Please pardon me.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushik. And I now request Dr. Rajiv Prasad sir for a take-home message. Sir, please. Dr. Rajiv, sir. So, if Dr. Rajiv Ranjan Prasad sir is not available, I will now request Dr. Tomcha Singh sir to conclude and to give a take-home message. Please.
So, we are not entertaining any questions, I think, sort of time.
So, yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, this is a very
question. If relevant, one question can be invited.
Yeah. I open to the house for one question, if any. If there's no queries, yes, Dr. Chatterjee has presented.
I think it will be better if you can take the question at the end of all the sessions, that if possible. If at all any questions are there, we can take it at the end of the
if anyone want to ask the question, please write down your question in chat box. We will take it.
Yeah,
okay.
We'll take it at the end. Okay, sir.
Yes. Okay, then I must thank Dr. Chatterjee for the nice presentation, and we'll move on to the next topic.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
My co-chairperson is not there. In the case, yes, I will call upon, I will be taking up the second agenda, which will be a debate on focal ablation of oligometastatic prostate cancer. Coordinator, Dr. N.K. Kalita is there.
Dr. Dinesh, you can continue. Dr. Dinesh, please.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Sir, for second session, I would like to invite Dr. Anup. He is professor and head at RIMS Ranchi. So Dr. Anup will invite all the judges, and it's a debate on focal ablation of oligometastatic prostate cancer. I would like to request Dr. Anup to invite the judges and the speakers and yes and no. So Dr. Anup, please.
Thanks, Dr. Dinesh. Good evening, everyone. And at outset, I'd like to thank organizers for inviting me to become a convener in this session. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So next topic is the focal ablation of oligometastatic prostatic cancer. I invite judges for this session, Dr. B.C. Goswami, Dr. D.K. Parida sir, and Dr. Sanjeev Misra.
Good evening.
And this topic is in a debate form, and in which in the support will be spoken by Dr. Gautam Sharma, and against the motion will be spoken by Dr. Amitabh Dey. So I would like Dr. Gautam Sharma to start the session, please.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Dr. Gautam, please give me 1 minute.
Yeah.
Dr. Rajiv Ranjan is there. Ravinder, please mute Dr. Rajiv Ranjan. Unmute Dr. Rajiv Ranjan. He wants to share his views. Ravinder, sir is there. Please unmute. Sir, आप अपने को unmute कर सकते हैं नीचे. सर नीचे एक कॉलम में वो माइक टाइप का बना हुआ है, उसको क्लिक कर दीजिए तो you will get unmuted.
सर बॉटम लेफ्ट सर.
सर बॉटम लेफ्ट में है सर.
और स्पेस बार को सर टेम्पररीली आप प्रेस करेंगे तो भी हो जाएगा सर. वेलकम डॉक्टर राजीव.
सर बॉटम लेफ्ट में है सर.
सर यू कैन.
रविंदर सर कह रहे हैं कि होस्ट हैज अनम्यूटेड यू, तो देखिए अगर आप अपने एंड पे कुछ कर सकते हो तो. रविंदर प्लीज. सर वो आपके एंड पे ही हो जाएगा सर, आप ट्राई करो सर.
No, he says again, unmute.
Sir, आप unmuted है, बोलिए सर.
Now audible now. Welcome sir. Sir, please. Dr. Rajiv sir, you are.
Dr. Rajiv, you can speak now.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes sir.
Yes sir, yes sir.
Okay. So, sorry for this mess up. It was a very nice presentation by Dr. Kaushik, and he covered this topic very well. And taking us back to the history, from history of the androgen deprivation therapy to the current status of the therapy in the role of managing prostate cancers. And he discussed the role of new adjuvant ADT, and he also discussed its role in the lymph node positive prostate cancers, which are localized. So starting at the, so in the interest of time, I will be very brief, just mention 2 or 3 points. He mentioned that androgen therapy has a wide role in the management of prostate cancer, except in the very early case, there is a definitive role of androgen deprivation therapy in intermittent risk group to high risk group. And he, as I mentioned, and he mentioned 2 studies, very important studies for the management of new adjuvant ADT. 2 studies that he mentioned, one was STROG and another was 86105. So, and he also discussed the role of IMRT. He mentioned actually briefly about the role of IMRT. And in adjuvant setting, he mentioned many studies, out of which 2, as he specifically mentioned, was RTOG 8531, where the continuous dosing was done, and it showed overall improvement in overall survival. And then he discussed various duration for which the hormonal therapy is used. So in nutshell, it was a very extensive presentation, very clear-cut presentation, and I'm sure all of us must have got something out of this presentation. So thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. And I really apologize. It was muted from your side, so I was trying to come and I couldn't do myself. So thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity.
Sir, we apologize for this mess up. Thank you very much for your nice take-home message. And I now again invite Dr. Sharma to speak.
Now again, I invite Dr. Gautam to restart his topic. And Dr. Gautam, please, you can start the debate now. Doctor.
Yeah, it's okay.
Good evening, everyone. Well, thank you everyone for being such a generous audience to provide me this opportunity to speak before you. So yes, we should rather must go for focal ablation in cases of oligometastatic prostate cancers. So if you go through some of the published papers, we observe that most of the studies have taken 5 or less bony lesions, while some has also included lymph nodes and visceral mets. So now the question is that how to choose patient for focal ablation in oligometastatic settings. So we'll have the answer to this situation as I move forward in my presentation with evidences. So coming to the SABR COMET trial, so where patients with up to 5 metastatic lesions were taken, and arm 1 received palliative RT as a standard of care, and in arm 2, the patients received SABR in addition to standard of care, and the patients were followed up. So in this trial, 14 patients received SABR having metastatic prostate disease. And the OS benefit, when long-term outcomes were seen, it was of 22 months versus only 13 months in the original analysis, which corresponds to an absolute benefit of 24.6% at 5 years. And SABR did not result in detriment in quality of life, and no new safety signals were apparent. Then coming to a publication in JCO 2016, 6,382 patients, out of which 5,844 patients received ADT alone, while 538 patients received ADT as well as prostate RT. And the median follow-up was 5.1 years. On univariate analysis, prostate RT plus ADT had longer median overall survival, as well as improved 3-year, 5-year, and 8-year overall estimates. On multivariate analysis, prostate RT improved overall survival. So the conclusion of this paper was that men receiving prostate RT plus ADT lived substantially longer than men treated with ADT alone. Now coming to the POPSTAR trial, 33 patients were taken and were followed for 2 years. The intervention was single fraction of 20 gray SABR to all the visible sites of disease. And the clinical outcome measures were the safety and feasibility of single fraction SABR for patients with oligometastatic prostate cancer. And secondary endpoints were local and distant progression-free survival, toxicity, and quality of life. What they found is that 32 patients out of 33 patients completed the prescribed course of treatment. Only 1 had grade 3 adverse event. And among 22 patients who had hormone-sensitive prostate cancer, freedom from ADT at 24 months was 48%. So the conclusion was that single SABR session was feasible and associated with low morbidity in this cohort. Over 1/3 of patients did not progress and were free from ADT at 2 years. The quality of life measures were maintained with this treatment strategy. So this is a trial which included prostate brachytherapy in the setting of oligometastatic prostate cancer. And 40 patients were taken where metastatic directed therapy was given to 18 patients. And the 5-year castration-free, prostate cancer-free survival rate and cancer-specific survival was 64% and 87.9% respectively. So the conclusion of this paper was that combination of prostate directive radiotherapy and metastatic directive radiotherapy using prostate HDR brachytherapy and EBRT was a feasible approach and had better CRPC-free survival rates than PDRT alone for patients with newly diagnosed metastatic prostate cancer. So this is a paper which from the Johns Hopkins Hospital, and they have taken patients from 2013 to 18. So this was this is one of the largest retrospective study which included 156 patients. The intervention was SABR, and after a median follow-up of 24.6 months, the PSA stability or decline after RT was 86%. Local failure at 12 months was 3.9% and at 24 months was 7.4%. The median biochemical progression-free survival was 12.9 months and 52% at 1 year. And only 8 patients developed grade 2 toxicity. On stratification and multivariate analysis, peri-RT ADT, patients having small GTV and hormone-sensitive prostate cancer were associated with improved biochemical progression-free survival. Peri-RT ADT and hormone-sensitive prostate cancer were associated with longer time to next intervention after radiation therapy. So the key points were the optimal time for intervention is with lower volume disease. Although ADT remains the standard of care in men with metastatic disease, a cohort of patients treated with a course of ADT and MDT appears to have a sustained disease response after testosterone recovery. Therefore, indefinite ADT might not be necessary in all cases. Metastatic directed therapy using SABR appears feasible in delaying the initiation of systemic therapies that often have an unfavorable adverse effect profile, especially ADT, while itself minimizing adverse effect. So coming to some of the prospective trials, STORM trial, which is a phase 2 study and included 3 or less extracranial lesions, and their primary endpoint was ADT-free survival. So the 5-year ADT-free survival of 8% in patients under surveillance alone and 34% in the MDT group. Secondary endpoint of CRPC-free survival at 5 years was 53% in subjects under surveillance and 76% in those receiving MDT. Coming to the HORED trial, so this was a multicentric prospective randomized control trial, which included 216 patients who received ADT alone, while the other 260 patients received EBRT in addition to the ADT. But this trial didn't find any significant difference in overall survival. However, they have also mentioned that although this CI cannot exclude a substantial survival benefit. So coming to the landmark STAMPEDE trial, which included 1,032 patients receiving standard of care plus RT, and the RT dose used was 55 gray in 20 fraction or 36 gray in 6 fraction. They found that RT improved failure-free survival compared with standard care alone. Overall survival was not improved, but they have also mentioned that pre-specified subgroup analysis in patients with low metastatic burden, RT improved failure-free survival as well as 3-year overall survival. And their conclusion was that prostate radiotherapy improves survival of men with low metastatic burden and that it should be now a standard of treatment. So my last slide of evidence is STOP-CAP systemic review and meta-analysis. So this meta-analysis pulled results of HORED and STAMPEDE trial and included 2,126 patients. They didn't find any overall improvement in survival or PFS prostate radiotherapy. There was an overall improvement in biochemical progression and failure-free survival equivalent to 10% benefit at 3 years. But they have mentioned that the effect of prostate radiotherapy varied by metastatic burden, and there was 7% improvement in 3-year survival in men with fewer than 5 bone metastases. And their conclusion was that prostate radiotherapy should be considered for men with metastatic hormone-sensitive prostate cancer with a low metastatic burden. Now coming to the international guidelines, let's see what they say. So NCCN has also mentioned that yes, radiotherapy can be given to patients having low metastatic volume diseases, and their basis was from the STAMPEDE trial, which showed that the pre-specified low volume subset had a significant improvement in both failure-free survival and overall survival. The ESMO 2020 guidelines also says that yes, we should give prostate RT. This is not plus or minus situation. They have mentioned that yes, patients should receive prostate RT along with ADT.
Dr. Sharma, your time is up. You have crossed your 8 minutes.
Yes, I'm completing.
So my
take-home message is that we should use highly sensitive imaging technologies. And by doing so, if we find 4 or less bony metastatic lesion, de novo metastatic disease, and hormone-sensitive disease, we should go for focal ablation of oligometastatic prostate cancer. And by doing so, we'll not only get significant PFS or preserved QOL, but also overall survival. So be vocal for local in treatment of oligometastatic prostate cancer. Thank you.
Now I invite Dr. Amitav Ray to present his session. Dr. Amitav,
yes,
he will be speaking against mission.
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible.
And are my slides visible, sir?
Yes.
Yes. Your slide is also visible. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir, for the opportunity. I would especially like to thank you for letting us meet Dr. Mohanty after so long. And I've been a big fan of sir for the last 20 years, even before I went into radiotherapy. I hope sir is listening. This is a great honor to be able to speak in front of you, as is it an honor to speak in front of so many luminaries across Eastern India. At the very outset, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Sharma for doing such a great job. The reason why I say this is because when I was first asked to do this debate, I was actually asked to speak on what he spoke today. And like Dale Carnegie said, there are always 3 speeches that we usually prepare for. One that we practice, the other that we give, and the other one, the last one that I wish I had given, and that is the speech that Dr. Sharma just gave. So I wanted to speak for the motion, but nevertheless, I'll try to do justice to whatever is being given to me. So I'll try to take it apart now. And when we, as we all say, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I'll just try to take apart the topic for all of us. Oligometastatic. Now, are we really sure what we're talking about here? Because we'll come across multiple definitions, multiple explanations, multiple investigations for defining oligometastatic, but no objective criteria as of today. Second is, when we talk about focal ablation, are we limiting ourselves to the upfront hormone-sensitive prostate cancers, or are we also looking at CRPC? Third, are we talking about ablation at the primary site, at the metastatic foci, or both? Fourth, what technique of ablation are we talking about here? Is it radiation? Is it surgery? Is it something completely different? Finally, what is the status as far as data synthesis goes? What data do we have? And Dr. Sharma has fantastically brought out almost all the data available regarding this. I'll try to bring out the loopholes in this. And finally, what are our colleagues in the other departments doing? What have they done to compete with us or radiation oncologists as far as alternatives to ablative therapy is concerned? So starting off with oligometastatic. Now, I'll just show you this busy slide, won't go into too many details. 2 things are important. Number one, sites of metastasis are different across different studies. Number of metastases different across different studies. And I believe most importantly, the imaging modality to pick up a metastatic site are completely heterogeneous. So we don't have any standardization as far as what oligometastatic really is. There may be some level of standardization now after the STAMPEDE. We'll talk about that slightly later. So if you go to Nature Reviews Urology, and I believe Nature is one of the most respected journals that we have right now, and they talk about oligometastatic prostate cancer, try and define it. And this is quoting verbatim from the article. It says, until genomic data exists to prove a biological component of the definition of oligometastatic disease, a clinical diagnosis made on the basis of up to 5 extrapelvic lesions is reasonable for use. Remember, up to 5 extrapelvic lesions, does not limit it to bone, lymph node, lung, whatever. It is 5 lesions or less. Second, and this is something that they also talk about, cancers presenting in the oligometastatic state include a very heterogeneous spectrum of biologies. So some of these lesions would quickly progress to metastasis, others metastasize gradually, and finally there is lack of capacity for spread in some, where in the oligometastatic state is the only state to which they would eventually metastasize. So we are basically bunching together apples, oranges, and bananas and calling them all the same thing, oligometastasis. Should that be the case? Moving on, what do they say about local therapy in this article? They say that it is safe. You can do it. You can do a prostatectomy. You can do radiotherapy. You can do what you want. It is safe. But does that really mean that it is effective? And again, quoting verbatim, current data is insufficient for determining their effect on oncological outcomes. And these aggressive treatments in oligometastatic prostate should only be considered in the context of a clinical trial. So let me then rephrase our topic. I'm not going to say no to any focal therapies, but I would say not yet. That would make more sense to us because we don't have possibly the level of data that we would consider to be adequate. Now, moving forward, where do we give the radiation? So we have been doing this for quite some time. We have pelvic and non-pelvic nodes being looked at prospectively and retrospectively. But when we have done prospective studies in the past, we haven't found a statistically significant difference in overall survival. Remember, the same thing when looked at retrospectively, and why I brought this out is because Dr. Sharma also had alluded to a number of studies, most of which were retrospective. So data coming out of that might not really make too much of a difference as far as clinical decision making is concerned. Moving on, metastasis-directed therapy. A number of small studies, more like pilot studies being done to assess, testing the waters, kind of to see whether it's safe, it's doable, so on and so forth. And these have actually given us a pretty good idea that yes, this can be doable. Again, can be doable does not really make a difference as far as the outcome of the disease is concerned. One of the most interesting studies that I came across while researching for today's topic was this study coming out of the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, where they looked at a subgroup which I think we should be looking at in much more deeper light. And this is the CRPC oligometastatic group, wherein they were basically trying to see whether the systemic therapy that is being used can be continued with the addition of a focal therapy to a new onset or a new lesion that was being diagnosed on follow-up. And the answer to that is yes. So this may be one area where we might be able to make a bigger difference as radiation oncologists, because the systemic therapy need not be changed into the next line of therapy. But then again, in this context, there are medical oncology colleagues who have jumped in and they are trying to add on newer therapies to the standard of care and trying to improve the outcome. We'll look at that shortly. So moving on, now we're sure what to treat yet. And I'll again take you back to the STOMP trial, where metastasis-directed therapy gives an advantage, and the SABRE-COMET trial, which is basically a basket trial of multiple metastatic, oligometastatic cancers. The problem here is the toxicity was actually surprisingly high when SBRT was added on, with 3 out of 66 patients, which is about almost 5% of the total number of patients experiencing a grade 5 toxicity. Now, that is something that has to be always taken with a lot of caution, because this is one thing that we possibly not want to do for a patient who's suffering from metastatic disease. So the question is, why are we debating this? The reason is, as Dr. Sharma also clearly pointed out, a number of studies which have actually shown a benefit. And I'll show you the last slide that he showed you, and that is basically the stopgap systemic review and meta-analysis. And this is what that meta-analysis showed us. No difference as far as OS PFS is concerned when you treat the prostate in an oligometastatic prostate cancer setting, especially in the hormone-sensitive phase. But there is a difference in biochemical progression-free and failure-free survival in these groups of patients. It's statistically significant. Also, a subgroup comes up where there is clear difference in effect on metastatic burden on survival, with an absolute improvement of 7% in 3-year survival in men who had 4 or fewer, that is less than 5 bone metastases. Now, I'll stop here. Is this then the new definition of oligometastatic disease? The answer, unfortunately, is no, because if you look at the radiological imaging employed by most of the studies that we're discussing here today, they did not include the modern methods of doing a PSMA or choline PET scan. They were still sticking to bone scans and CT scans. And we know that there is a significant subgroup of patients, even in the non-metastatic setting, who actually come up with asymptomatic metastatic foci when a modern imaging investigation like a PSMA PET is done instead of the standard bone CT scan combination. So should we then be trusting this data to make clinical decisions? Probably not yet. We're looking out for more data with modern investigation techniques to give us better ideas in defining oligometastasis. What about the other ablative strategies? A very similar picture comes up, wherein surgery, again, prospectively gives you some kind of a benefit, but again, that benefit is for a group of patients who would not be classically called oligometastatic as far as the definitions that we accept are concerned, because these are patients with bone-only metastasis, without visceral, without nodal, which do not fall into the category of the standard oligometastatic cancers and prostate that we're talking about. So this is the data synthesis phase, and I'm so happy to see a large number of radiation oncology trials.
Dr. Amitav, may I intervene, please? Your time is up, so kindly conclude.
I'll do it as fast as I can. So what else is happening, and I think this slide should be my last slide, is can I make this my last slide, please?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So if I had actually a bunch of slides after this also, but I'll finish here. And this is important because our medical oncology colleagues have actually shown us that they don't care whether they have less than 4 bone metastases. They don't care about the disease burden at all. In all the patients that they treat, docetaxel does give you a survival advantage in the low metastatic burden, but the game changer, abiraterone, seems to give a survival advantage when combined with androgen deprivation therapy across the board for any level of metastasis that we're looking at. So I think we still have some way to go. This is what they are doing for us. They're adding PARP inhibitors. They're bringing in newer drugs. They're going to theranostics. They're giving us radiopharmaceuticals. They're doing immunotherapy. Everything is being combined to the standards of care that we have today. So it is not just focal ablative therapy that is important. There's so many other things. And focal ablative therapy has still some way to go before it shows us a survival advantage and can match up to everything else that we've been seeing. So this is my final thank you slide, and I hope my radiation oncology colleagues forgive me for speaking against what I actually practice myself. I do oligometastatic radiotherapy now, and thank you so much, and back to Chairperson.
Thank you, Dr. Amitav, for giving nice presentation. Now I invite Dr. Gautam Sarma for any rebuttal, please.
Yeah.
Dr. Gautam.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, so oligometastatic setting is basically a heterogeneous setting, but we have to select a subgroup where we can give focal ablation therapy. So I have in my last slide, I have cleared the picture that yes, first we have to choose a higher imaging modality like PSMA PET, choline PET, or sodium chloride PET, or whole body MRI. And if we get 4 or less metastatic bony lesions in a de novo metastatic setting, hormone sensitive prostate cancer, we should go for focal ablation in oligometastatic prostate cancer. And we have to give radiation to both the sides, both the metastatic side and the prostate.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes. Dr. Amitav, yeah, any rebuttal from your end, please?
Sir, it's very difficult for me to rebut someone who's actually spoken about what I wanted to speak of myself. But having said that, I completely agree. And I think, as I said right up front, this should possibly not be a for and against debate. It should possibly be for and add-on debate. So all that our medical oncology colleagues seem to be doing, should we actually get into the boat and try to help them out by increasing the duration of treatment of a particular type of androgen deprivation by using focal radiotherapy and not replacing focal radiotherapy with what they're doing. So I would like to humbly submit that I think Dr. Sharma has done a great job in defending this, and I hope that we can also, as being in the opposition, we can also contribute by accepting focal radiotherapy as a part of the entire treatment paradigm and not competing with each other.
Yeah, it has shifted basically.
Exactly.
Dr. Amitav, very true. Nindak nahi rakhiye.
Yeah. And Yeah. So by just moving forward, I think I should invite judges for Dr. BC. I invite Dr. BC Goswami for his expert comment. Dr. BC Goswami, please.
Thank you. And it was very interesting debate. And both the speakers or lawyers pleaded their cases very nicely. However, Amitabh Roy, somehow he was more inclined towards the other side. So I think the judgment is clear. Thank you.
Now I request Dr. D.K. Parida to give his message in this regard. Dr. D.K. Parida, please.
Yes. Thanks the organizers for inviting me, and my judgment actually I am a little biased towards Dr. Gautam. He has produced enough evidence for the subgroup who will get the benefit from local radiotherapy. And at the same time also, I will not actually put Dr. Amitabh, who has made a great effort to prove his points also. Actually, as he rightly pointed out, actually the imaging modalities are heterogeneous. Our patient population are also heterogeneous. And right now we are having a lot of better imaging opportunities where we can actually take out the specific subgroup who will benefit from local radiotherapy. And right now we are having better radiation techniques also. My judgment is with Dr. Amitabh, Gautam, and I think he has proven his point. And at the same time, we are not denying other modalities. We acknowledge their contribution, and whenever actually required, we can add systemic chemotherapy and immunotherapy and so on and so forth. We are not denying this thing, but first of all, we must give the benefit of radiation to the select subgroup. Thank you.
Now I invite Dr. Sanjay Misra to give his conclusion.
Yeah, good evening, sir. It was a nice debate, and as already the speaker himself has admitted, because it should be a for and add-on. So the practice is changing now, and there are many trials which have already proved that adding radiation to the oligometastatic side, it has improved the quality of life. It has improved the metastasis-free survival, but though overall survival is yet to come. But definitely there are so many trials going on, it will show benefit in overall survival also. So quality of life is a very important thing, and metastasis-free survival is also an important thing which is to be considered. And soon the overall survival will also prove. So I will also go in favor of Dr. Goswami. So the conclusion is definitely along with the metastatic side, primary has to be radiated. So that should be the take-home message. Thank you.
With this, I conclude this session, and now I invite for panel discussion and Dr. Dinesh. Now again go back to the
thank you very much, Dr. Anup, for just moderating this session of debate, and thank you very much all the judges and speakers for this nice debate. So moving ahead to the next session, that is a panel discussion, and this is on when and how to treat pelvic lymph node. So for this, I would like to invite Dr. Saroj Majumdar. He is consultant radiation oncology at SMC Jaipur. So Dr. Majumdar, please, and I will try to request Dr. Majumdar to invite the panelists.
Good evening, everybody. Can somebody help me to share the screen of my slides? Dr. Manish. So,
sir, this is in bottom there is a green button, share screen.
No, Ravinder, please upload the slides.
Yeah, it's okay. So it's visible now. Please go ahead.
Just one moment. So, good evening, everybody. My job is to moderate the sessions, and my learned panelists are Dr. Inderbir Singh. I think he's there. Yeah, there are 7 panelists. Dr. Inderbir Singh, may I get the response? Dr. Leena Gupta Ligu, Dr. Shankar Dev Rai, Dr. Partha Pratim Mehdi.
Yes, sir, I have joined. If you can hear me.
Thank you, I can hear you. Dr. Pritanjali Singh, Dr. Amit.
Yes, sir, I am here.
Okay. Dr. Arup.
Yes, sir. Anup. Nice to see you after a long time.
Yeah. So actually, I am Dr. Saroj Das Majumdar. I am from AIIMS Bhubaneswar. I am additional professor. I was in SMC Bahrain earlier. That was maybe from website it has been taken. So I am in Odisha itself. And thank you for giving this opportunity, the organizer. So it's very easy job for me to shoot the question to my panelist, but it's not that easy to ask question also is a difficult job. Since Dr. Arup is from Tripura, I will ask question from him. This topic is actually when and how to give radiotherapy to the lymph node area in prostate cancer. As you know, prostate cancer is when it can be very low risk, localized to prostate, can be intermediate high risk, even localized to prostate, or it is metastatic. In metastatic setting, as we came to know that Mr. Parker, he presented in a study, a STAMPEDE trial, and he showed that even in metastasis, you give radiation to the tumor itself, and it will work. The benefit is there, but we are not sure whether lymph node, if irradiated, there will be benefit. So we don't bother about giving radiation to the nodal area in the pelvis. In case of metastasis, it is yet to come. There is another scenario when the tumor is confined to the prostate with low risk, like Glisson's is less than 6, PSA is less than 10, very low risk. Surgeons are doing surgery, radical prostatectomy. They don't touch the regional lymph nodes. We also mimic them and we don't touch the regional lymph nodes. But what will happen to the scenario when the disease is localized in the tumor itself, but biologically it is different, like say more than 10 PSA, Glisson's more than 6. These are the scenarios. So actually lots of questions are there which are unanswered. Our learned panelists will tell us one by one. So the first question to Dr. Arup is that, can
Yes,
you
sir.
please tell that what are the actually pelvic lymph nodes we expect regionally in prostate cancer when the tumor is actually confined to the prostate gland? It's just like a grand anatomy knowledge only. Please tell.
Okay, it's a parabiotic one. Then external iliac we get. Even obturator lymph nodes are described as a high risk group. These groups are. And say pre-caval or paracaval lymph nodes, they are of low risk and other things they do. But parabiotic lymph node involvement is very high. It has a implication also during radiotherapy planning.
Okay. Anybody want to differ in this answer? I think this is basics. I'll go quickly to the next, please. Next slide, please. As we know from the grand anatomy, you can see in the picture here, internal iliac, obturator, external iliac, and presacral group of lymph nodes are most common. It might spread to perirectal, also common iliac and para-aortic. So the regional lymph node, lower pelvic area is the commonest area. And if you go to the surgical series, 40 to 60% of the lymph nodes are located in internal and presacral chains of lymph node. So if we cover this area, actually our job is done so far anatomy knowledge is concerned. And this is from textbook of radiation oncology. You can see more than 8% lymph nodes are in red in color. They are like presacral group, internal iliac, obturator, and also very low para-aortic region. These are the area where we expect lymph nodes more. So my next question to my next colleague is Dr. Inderbir Singh. Kindly please tell, is there any way to know, is there any way to predict actually the number of lymph nodes to be positive, or what are the incidents in other way? In our clinics, how to know that, yes, this is the group where I'll get more or significant positive lymph node when I'll do surgery. Clinically, it is N0 scenario.
Yeah. Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello? Am I unmute?
Yes, sir.
Hello? Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Actually, we are in my center, and especially we are following the all routine these things, like apart from the clinical examination and ultrasound, we used to do the CCT, the common CT scan. But nowadays we are also doing this MRI of more frequently for staging. But as mentioned by earlier speakers, these imaging modalities are not very accurate. Everybody will agree that CT scan is not that very neither sensitive nor very distinct. Yeah, in the so we follow our clinical practice that any higher T stage, maybe T2, T3, or TC, ideally we include the whole pelvic RT, because we are having the all 2D radiation facility. Now, of course, Impal is having 3D and the IMRT facilities now coming out at Professor Tomsa's place. We will switch over to that, but my past experience tells me that any higher stage will include this thing, because our imaging modalities we cannot predict as of now. So we don't have the PET base and other specific imaging studies. And once we have it, we should utilize these imaging modalities to detect the chance of this thing, all the lymph nodes involvement, including the para-aortic. Because if you see the RTOG trial, 9413, they said that we should go higher up to L4-5. But earlier we are treating only the pelvic brim at the most. So this is the scenario.
Okay, nicely told, sir. This is like when the stage is T3 or T4, then we expect MRI to be done, not in all cases. And CT scan tells better about lymph node status in the pelvis. So CT, MRI, I was searching the books and it says that in higher stage T3, T4, then you go for CT and MRI also. MRI will tell better about capsule invasion and seminal vesicle involvement. My question will be, sir, for you, whether we should do PSMA PET for all patients or any reservation in that. We'll limit to certain group of patients to know about the regional nodal status.
Yeah. Nowadays, these PCS and the colon specific these things are coming up. Am I right? Frankly speaking, I don't have my personal experience because we are not doing this routinely. But the book says, literature says that in the higher stage, we should do this, because we are going to give very conformal high dose IMRT therapy. And for that, we will require this image-based, this guided PET image and a PCSMA, and as well as the colon specific this thing. These modalities are, is done in the many centers now, routinely done, based on this.
Yes, sir. So some this nuclear medicine people, they suggest that when the Gleason score is more than 8, then PSMA is good. If it's more than 10, even the normal FDG PET scan can pick up that. But having said that, all centers are not fortunate to get this thing. So we stick to our basic things like CT scan and MRI. I would like to ask Dr. Amit to tell that anything you practice, like there is a nomogram to know and predict about this nodal metastasis, which can predict very well, which is validated earlier, like Ross formula. Do you utilize?
Yeah, Ross formula is there. We can predict. 15% is the cutoff. If it is more than 15%, we have to give whole pelvic RT. If it is less than 15%, we can give only pelvic RT, only radiation to the prostate only RT. If it is more than 15%, then whole pelvic RT.
Okay. So now Dr. Pritanjali is there, or I don't think she responded. So when I'll go to then again, Dr. Amit, please. So in which scenario you'll treat? Suppose clinically it is N0, but when you will include nodal irradiation?
Then we have to see the risk factor. If it is in high risk factor, means the Gleason score is more than 8, PSA is 10 to more than 20, and T stage is 3 or 4, then we have to include pelvic node. Otherwise, in the low risk, we can give only prostate RT.
Okay. Can you please scroll the slide, please, downward? I cannot control it. Yes. So I'll just put a little, in practice, actually, if you see the pattern of practice, we are doing that, actually, intermediate or high risk. Even if it is N0 clinically, then we give radiation to the pelvis, knowing very well that when the nomogram says that the incidence, expected incidence is more than 15%. But if you go to the history, RTOG 9413, and also genitourinary tumor study group, J201, the RTOG 9413, actually what they did, they gave neoadjuvant androgen deprivation therapy with whole pelvis radiation. And another group is a mini pelvic irradiation. Another group is prostate only. So 3 divisions. And at the end of 7 years, they found that progression-free survival was 40%, in whole pelvis, mini pelvis 35, 27%, prostate only. So progression-free survival was better if you include lymph nodes according to RTOG 9413. But mind it, there was no difference in overall survival.
Overall survival.
Yeah, same thing happened in J201 also. In this study, they had like T1B to T3 N0 non-metastatic disease, prostate only versus whole pelvic irradiation. Here, what happened in that group, 55% of the men were less than 15% risk of lymph node metastasis chance. So that is why probably giving radiation was also no difference. The OS was having no difference. But in subgroup analysis, when radiotherapy was given in those groups, when they did not receive androgen deprivation therapy, these are the group they were benefited with event-free survival. One arm 83, another one 50%. It means that when androgen deprivation therapy was not given, even if less than 15% risk of lymph node metastasis is there, and you include nodal irradiation, there is benefit event-free survival. So, sir, having these controversy things, what evidence support you, Dr. Inderbir Singh, to give radiation to the pelvis in your practice? I know it's a different institute, they practice differently because now VMAT has come, SBRT has come, CyberKnife has come. Even if high risk cases, they are not giving radiation to the regional nodes. So, sir, what is your take on?
Yeah, actually, you are very much right that the practice of the radiation different in different centers according. Now, when the RTOG and the other ZTECs are doing, they are using the minimum is the, of course, earlier they use this thing, but the minimum is 3D CRT or now the IMRT or if external beam, this thing, they are using the brachytherapy boost as well. So the practice differs. So if, I will be specific to my center since our brachytherapy also not very regular. So when we are giving by the whole pelvic RT only, you will agree that there's some the studies when there is a comparison between the 3D, IMRT and this thing, the conventional RT with 2D, there was a lot of toxicities, the early as well as the lag toxicities, and the coverage of the lymph nodes was not good, and we cannot give the dose escalation, etc. So apart from leaving aside the large landmark trials and others, in the actual reality in the ground level at the practice, the reality is that in my center, I'm a little bit hesitant to give RT to whole pelvic RT for the early cancer, T1, T2, and other, in spite of the high risk or Gleason score more than 7 or 8. Because I want to preserve them for the chemotherapy and the toxicity, the pelvic bone, quite a bone marrow reserve, and we are prone to give more ADT, and we give the RTS and when required, when there is a metastatic to other areas. So I will say that we don't have those Roth score and other high predicting lymph node micrometastasis and other. In spite of all the evidence and the NCCN guideline, I will reserve my whole pelvic RT unless it is T4 or periprosthetic or the surgeon cannot do the resection because of the they can't do a prostatectomy because of the comorbid condition and others. I will consider the other factors also, the patient survival, age, and many other factors before giving the whole pelvic RT. So my takeaway message is, it depends on the practicing center, our availability of the facility, and so depending on that, I will not give in the high risk or very early stage T2 or T3 whole pelvic RT as of now. We depend more on the ADT and the docetaxel and others. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Partha.
Hello. Yes, sir.
If you go back to the literature actually, and you see prostate-only radiotherapy group, the radiation giving in those era in the technique, if you see the regional nodal irradiation was by surrogate, whatever advantage or disadvantage, it was covered.
Yes, sir.
By traditional method, there is no purely prostate-only radiotherapy. Actually, regional nodes, low-level nodes got radiotherapy by default. So in this scenario, and also if you see the most contemporary radiation, now also, yes, it came from TMH, the trial came into
property.
Yes. So they say that giving whole pelvic radiation has event-free survival is better. And if you go to prostate-only radiotherapy in the past era, in that time, prostate-only radiotherapy was giving radiation to the regional nodes. What is your take? How to optimize these controversial things from your perspective?
Sir, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. My take is, sir, is that there is no evidence as of now that why we should not treat the whole pelvis, especially in unfavorable, intermediate risk and high risk. Even all the guidelines have clearly suggested if PSA is more than 10, of course, if it is more than 20 for high risk, then you have to definitely, but even for unfavorable risk patients, like PSA more than 10, but grade group 3, that is PSA 4+3. And there is the Roche formula, which is very simple. I differ from Indigo sir in this regard that the Roche formula is very simple to calculate. We do not treat any prostate without doing the PSA and the Gleason score. So by mathematical formula, we can calculate the lymph node involvement. And if it is more than 15%, then we should definitely treat the whole pelvis. In fact, studies are coming up now that where they have shown retrospectively that when we actually go back and see those patients which were actually treated with prostate-only RT, they have seen that actually the risk of involvement was actually, although the Roche formula is actually under predicting the risk. If we use PSMA PET or lymphoscintigraphy, this risk may go up to 40%, 60%. So actually we are under treating the patients if we are not giving radiotherapy to the pelvic nodes, at least prophylactic radiotherapy to a dose of 45 to 50.4 gray as recommended by NCCN also. And I would like to remind everyone that all the dose escalation trials that we are talking about, most of the dose escalation trials from the MD Anderson Cancer Center and others, they have also treated first 46 to 50 gray to the whole pelvis only. Then they have boosted the primary tumor with IMRT or something else. Even in those times, the IMRT was not routinely available in those centers. They used box fill technique only, sir. to treat the first 46 to 50 Gray to the whole pelvis, and then boosted the prostate to 78 to 80 Gray. And they have also seen that it is not increasing the toxicities that much as we are actually fearing. So I think it is the fear of toxicities that is hampering us or withdrawing us from giving those to the whole pelvis. 46 to 50 Gray prophylactic dose in unfavorable high-risk cancers, prostate cancers, as well as all high-risk cancers should be routinely given, sir. That is my take. And when IMRT is available, then definitely the entire thing can be done with like they did with POPRT. They did simultaneous integrated boost, moderately hypofractionation to the whole prostate, and conventional fractionation of 2 Gray to the pelvis. So the chances is also.
I will come to that. Can you please scroll the slide, please? Next slide, please. Because I have seen the literature in some group, they give upper border of the pelvic field.
Yes,
the question of how to cover. Next slide, please. The next, some they have taken like L5 junction, some they have taken superior border as L5S1, some they have taken S1, S2, like that. And next slide, please. So next slide, please. Go down, please. We have covered these things. Please go down. So what we see, the coverage of nodal region in the pelvis also is a controversy. Yes, if you go to next slide, please. If you see the literature, so coverage of nodal regions by whole pelvic artery with the superior border, if you keep at L5S1, only 42% will 42% you will cover the nodal area. And if it is L4, L5 junction, then 93%. Yes, but in our residence program from the beginning, we know that L5S1 is our upper border. If say we don't have any contouring system, we just take traditional method of radiotherapy, then actually we are missing. So how do we cover this then? What is your take on this? Dr. Amit will tell us.
We used to take L4, L5 border. The upper border is L4, L5, and the lower one is the obturator foramen, up to obturator foramen.
Okay. And Dr. Indivor, sir,
you are right. All the literature says that after these high imaging techniques and these groups identified subgroups, we can go up to L4, 5 region. But for the low risks and for these things, in my center, we are using the old box technique, pelvis, L5S1, as you have mentioned, and we are going at least 2 centimeters below the ureteric membrane, or what we have seen. So that is how we are going 45 to 50 Gray. We cannot go beyond that because of the, as I mentioned already, because of the genitourinary and the rectal and other dose constraints. So I will still stick to L5S1. When I have the IMRT and other facility and the contouring facility and the other imaging modalities, I will go to the level L4, 5. Okay.
So rightly said, sir. Actually, RTOG consensus guideline says that you can track external, internal iliac vessels by 5 to 7 millimeter all around. That is there, you can track down. Otherwise, you can just take L5S1. This is the recommendation, not S1, S2, not L4, L5. So because the toxicity will go high. So if you have contouring facilities, you can then track down the vessels and right from the external and internal iliac, you can contour that. Lower border is obturator foramen lower border, or you can see the pelvic diaphragm. And also laterally, you can have pelvic rim, anatomical boundaries is included. So these are the contouring and volume which we take for the planning of pelvic nodal irradiation. And but how do you see the plan? How do you evaluate so that before execution of the plan, okay, this is my plan and what is the dose should be given? I will like to ask Dr. Partho about this.
Yes, sir. So it will depend on our the CTV coverage, the PTV coverage, whether in our center, when we prescribe dose to the PTV, we go for a 95% volume, should get 95% of the prescribed dose. So that is our first criteria. Then we go for checking the conformity, homogeneity indexes, the hotspots. And the most important criteria when we are treating to escalated doses is to prevent late genitourinary and GI toxicities. So, sir, we'll see the dose to the bladder, more especially to the bladder neck, the rectum, and the small bowel. So the bladder volumes, what we see is the dose received by the volume of the bladder receiving 30 gray up to high doses up to 70 gray. So there are definite plan criteria of RTOG, how much it should be. Especially more important for long-term toxicity is the volume of the bladder receiving 40 gray. Especially for the rectum, it is we use the same criteria, the volume V40, V50, V60, and for the small bowel, our criteria is that the volume receiving 45 gray should not be more than 200 cc of the bowel, total bowel dose. So we restrict our plans to this criteria mainly.
Amit, do you prefer SIB, like either sequential treatment or concomitant?
Actually, yes.
One you like?
No. I used to treat 66 gray in 25 fraction. So 50 gray to the pelvic node and 66 to the prostate only by SIP technique.
Okay. So some institute, they practice sequential dose because it's pelvis only. So dose per fraction, if it's more, they expect maybe toxicity will be more. Both are acceptable. SIP technique is there. If you are doing image guided radiotherapy, then only possible. Otherwise, in a busy center, it will be difficult. Sequential is always better. This is there. So which facility you recommend for a center that for treating prostate cancer, these are the minimum requirement we should have?
IMRT is the minimal requirement, sir. IMRT. If we have IGRT, then it is best. Otherwise, IMRT is the bare minimal requirement.
My question to Dr. Indibor, sir, please tell whether we can escalate the dose to the pelvic lymph nodes.
Yes, sure, definitely, provided you have the facilities as I mentioned. The pelvic nodes also, for the low risk micrometastasis, 45 or 50, 55 up to maximum, the range is there. But when we know this thing, the lymph nodes are definitely detectable more than 1 centimeter or 2. We have to escalate the dose up to, by using the IMRT or the techniques up to 60 or up to above that, up to. So dose escalation is one criteria without producing undue toxicity where benefit from this thing, lymph nodal irradiation benefit comes.
So can you please scroll the slides for me down? So 2-3 slides down, please. The dose escalations, this one, the dose escalation trials are actually ongoing trials, pivotal trials, and Ferraria. If you see, there are different pelvic lymph node. It is done by IMRT, of course, 50 gray, 55 gray, 60 gray to the pelvic or regional nodes. And they suggest that the toxicity like grade 3, 4 or grade 2 is manageable. It's not that high, so it is possible, feasible technically. So, but the benefit is yet to see whether this benefit will carry to long-term survival advantage or not. So, in TMH, this study came, they gave 68 gray in 25 fraction to the prostate and 50 gray in 25 fraction to the regional nodes. There is no survival advantage, but event-free survival is there. It is well tolerated. There is no significant increase toxicity, but we have to see for long-term follow-up for this type of patient. But what quality assurance test you do when patient go to the couch before that? Yes, this plan I have given, and these are the things I have to see so that I can deliver the dose to my patient. So can you please tell, sir, Dr. Partha, please tell. Quality assurance for whole pelvic RT.
Sir, for all routine cases of IMRT, when we are treating, especially more so in cases of pelvis, first of all, we follow a strict bladder and rectal protocol. We want the rectum to be empty and the bladder to be adequately filled so that the bowel is pushed out of the main pelvis. And then in that way we simulate and we try to reproduce the same during treatment also. So for that, in our center, we routinely use cone beam CT, sir. We do cone beam CT and we do bone matching. And after a bone-to-bone matching, we try to see whether the internal organs are in the same position as they were contoured on the planning CT scan. If there is any, suppose the bladder is overfilled or underfilled or the rectum is not empty, we sometimes, it is always good to have sometimes people are using somewhere multiple plans for multiple days, but we are not able to do it till now in our institute. We generally try to replicate the position again, and if it is not possible to fill the bladder adequately or the rectum is not empty, then we may skip the treatment also on that day. But most of the time we try to. This is the quality assurance we do. On the couch when the patient is on the couch, and sometimes if although not done routinely, but we try to do a patient specific QA prior to on a patient specific phantom our physicists they carry out for some of the plans when before actually treating the patient on the couch.
Thank you. Dr. Amit, please can you tell about late toxicity? This is a simple thing, but our residents will be benefited. So while giving radiation to the pelvis, dose escalations, whole pelvic RT, then what are the toxicities we should be aware of? When I see prostate cancer, okay,
there are two major late toxicity. One is the bladder telangiectasia, and second is the fracture of the pelvic node, femur neck, and sometimes rectal toxicity we often seen. So these three are the main late complication of this high dose radiation.
And one more question,
Dr. Majumdar sir.
Just last question. In salvage radiotherapy, Dr. Indivar Singh, we do sometimes salvage radiotherapy, give radiation very small field. Any role of including regional nodes in that? We know PSA is high. We give the post-operative tumor bed radiation. Any benefit of giving radiation to the regional nodes in that setting?
Yeah, if it is in the palliative, in the salvage setting, ideally, I will confine to the prostate only, because at this stage, including the pelvic nodes, as yes, even if the, we know that
does not support to give bigger field.
Bigger fields.
Smaller field on very small, localized to the tumor bed. If clips are there, very good. So this is the area. So I give it over to our chairman. Thank you, all the panelists. Any question can we ask directly to the panelists? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Majumdar.
So, Dr. Dinesh, I would like to ask one question.
Please go ahead, Dr. Aftab.
So we have discussed doses and dose escalation about this N0 node, basically. We were discussing this. And what about when there is a confirmed metastatic node, 1, 2, or 3 is there in the pelvis, then how much for just residents? How much? It is the dose is same as that of prostate, or is there any difference in dose recommendation is there?
Definitely, we have to increase the dose.
No, how much? That is the question. You are giving 76 gray, 74, 76. It's a high up near L4, L5.
Up to 66. Up to 66.
Yes.
Okay.
So any lymph node less than 3 centimeter, I think 66 gray is adequate. If it is more than, then we have to give again 60 to 66, and you can do simple nodal dissection if possible, or you have to give chemotherapy later on. But because it is outside prostate area, we cannot go beyond that.
Yeah, even ADT, we can start neoadjuvant ADT, 2 course. Correct. Then the size comes down, then we can go. So that can be kept. Certainly.
Just a minute. Radiation alone has no means. Nowadays, we have to give radiation along with ADT.
Yeah, that has to be there with obviously in high risk cases.
Yes, yes.
Thank you all. May I request Dr. Dinesh to proceed further to conduct the quiz.
So thank you again, Dr. Saroj Majumdar sir, and all the esteemed panelists for a nice panel discussion. So moving ahead with the next and last session, that is the onco quiz.